Welcome to Hardfire. I'm Ronald Wieck, and I'm here at Ground Zero on Thursday, September 11th, 2008. 7 years have passed since the devastating attacks destroyed the Twin Towers, left over 2,700 people in this city dead. We're here to talk to those strange souls who continue to insist that the attacks were the work of elements within the U.S. government. We're going to try to find out if they've developed a narrative for the events of that day, and we're going to try to find out if at long last they have substantial proof supporting their claims. Let's see for the next half hour what they have to say. We're here at historic St. Paul's Chapel on Broadway. This is where the truthers are flocking. We're going to go out there and meet them, talk to them, and we hope that some of them have developed, after 7 years, a narrative of the events of 9/11/2001.
I saw what happened on TV. To me, it didn't make any sense.
I'd like you to tell us if, at long last, your side has developed a narrative for what actually happened on September 11th, 2001. If you mind just fleshing it out for us, give us the sequence of events.
I mean, there's more than one narrative. I mean, the group isn't like one person has like the whole story. Everyone has a couple different ideas of what happened, and no one's sure. And that's the main problem, is that the questions haven't been answered.
What questions in particular trouble you?
One question is, why did the World Trade Center 7, that was not the two Twin Towers, was demolished? It fell straight down like this. So that is one of the main questions, because that wasn't even mentioned in the commission report.
Okay, well now, as you know, NIST has just released its final report on World Trade Center 7. It's a very comprehensive report, and they explain that it came down due to fire. They apparently minimized the effects of the diesel fuel tanks, but they found no evidence whatever supporting the demolition hypothesis. Now, have you looked at that report, or are you planning to?
I haven't, but I plan to, since you told me about it, because I researched every aspect about it, and that's one of the main things that everyone should do, is investigate it, to just for their knowledge, not for us to tell them this is what happened. I want to tell people to go investigate it so they could find out more about it and find out that there's still questions unanswered about it.
Oh, that's fair enough. Do you have any other questions that stand out in your mind as particularly troubling or unresolved?
Right now,
9/11 was an inside job.
right now, I can't think of that many, but I'm sure I can if I have more time.
The canard that pull it means blow up the building has been literally exploded. It is not a demolition term, except as insofar...
What about the rest of the buildings the first responders saying on record?
Pull it means attach cables.
Why did
it's
the
done...
BBC skew Larry Silverstein's statement about
They didn't.
Bullet? Yes, they did.
No, they didn't.
They did. Hold on. Yes, they did. They cut the end of
Larry
his statement
Silverstein
off.
said...
Can you just admit that on the BBC, that they cut the end of his statement
No.
off? Yes, they did. They
Larry-
cut the part where he said... Yeah, they cut... And we watched the building collapse. They
Yes.
cut that out of the BBC
Yes, he
completely.
did say that.
That completely ruins the context of the quote.
Okay, now...
ruins the context. You guys are liars. You're disgusting. BBC should be ashamed of themselves.
I don't work for the BBC. Looking for someone 7 years after the fact to tell me what happened 7 years ago. Give me some kind of coherent narrative.
A coherent narrative. Well, basically, there's evidence that shows that 9/11 was an inside job. I mean,
What is the evidence?
Well, for example, I mean, the commission, the head of the commission said it was set up to fail.
But the 9/11 Commission didn't investigate the actual collapses of the buildings. It didn't identify. The 9/11 Commission was a political commission that was simply there to answer questions.
You know what? John Kerry.
Because the NIST report got it right.
John Kerry said...
Joenko got it. That's Joenko's cockamamie theory. Joenko has no study. John Kerry doesn't know anything about the subject. He
told him that they pulled that building as a demolition
you cannot
for safety reasons, which is exactly what you just said.
Let's keep trying this. Pull does not mean blow up the building to a demolition expert. No, it isn't. I've called 24 demolition companies. You've called 0. Yes.
What's the point of a computerized controlled demolition when you could have a building fall on its own symmetrical blueprint with floors popping out one by one because of a fire? So it just blows a computerized controlled
World Trade Center 7 fell so symmetrically that it heavily damaged a building across the street.
But you know that NIST said that they can't explain what this event that occurred before the building collapsed. There was an event that occurred there in own documents. They say they can't explain it. Why can't they explain it other than collaborated eyewitness testimony?
You do know that NIST just released its final report on the collapse of World Trade Center 7.
Well, the computer simulation is based on nothing. It's an animation. There's no simulation there at all.
Are you planning to read the report?
I have read the report.
The reason demolition specialists think there were no bombs is that there is no evidence in terms of detonator caps, bits of wiring. No evidence whatever. 7 years after the fact, tell us a narrative. Tell us exactly what happened on 9/11/2001.
Well, I don't know, but more and more what I can say is that the new facts that keep emerging, new eyewitness reports, new scientific reports, just that the official story just becomes more and more false. So,
well, be a little more specific. What new science do we have?
Yes, for example, science-wise, actually, let me just start with something that just came unearthed the other day. There was a fellow, I forget his name, but it's on 911truth.org, who worked in the Los Angeles airport on 9/11 through security. He had heard two things. One was that through other, apparently, I wasn't there, but communications to personnel, they first heard that Nora was told to stand down from the highest office in the land, including the White House. There was that, and then the second thing he heard was the first reports is that the plane was shot down in Shanksville, and the story changed. So there are things like that. He presented this, and there are other persons that corroborate that story. Who knows if it's really true, but there are other persons corroborating, and it just adds more against the official story than for it.
Okay, now you do know that this business about a stand down has been pretty heavily debunked. For example, if there was a stand down, why would the plane in Shanksville be shot down? You can have one or the other, but not both, obviously.
Disobeyed the orders.
Why?
Because they were good patriotic Americans who suspected, I think, that they were being betrayed by their own government. That's what I think.
Now, we're looking for a narrative. Why would the government do this?
Well, we've had a history of false flag operations going back to the 1960s. We have Operation Northwoods, which was...
Operation Northwoods was a wacky plan. Lyman Lemnitzer he was laughed out of the room for this plan. You can't use a plan that wasn't implemented.
To use it. We have other things. We have Adolf Hitler in the past in Germany. He used the Reichstag. He burned his own Reichstag to blame.
No, he didn't burn it. A mad Dutchman burned it, and the Nazis blamed it on the communists. And
It was basically Göring did confess. I think it was the Nuremberg trial. That basically it was an inside job by the government, and it created a great amount of intolerance by the German people, and they were.
Can you think of an American false flag attack?
Well, what about the Gulf of Tonkin?
That's yes, but it's obviously not a false flag attack in that there was action in the Gulf of Tonkin the day before the famous incident. There were.
It's the news we've been getting from that day to this. Seems to have so many holes in it that it's like Swiss cheese for news.
See, Johnson exploited the Gulf of Tonkin incident, but he said, his famous quote was, "Those stupid sons of bitches were shooting at flying fish." So in other words, he understood that the sailors were reacting to blips on a radar screen. Nobody staged anything.
$4 trillion were printed out of thin air by the Federal Reserve. And it's just ridiculous.
The architect, who is a top architect called Richard Gage, has come out and produced a video called Blueprint for Truth, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
We just did a debate with Richard Gage against a debunker named Mark Roberts. Gage was handled very, very roughly, and quite frankly, the man has never designed anything bigger than a gymnasium. Is it possible for the fire department to be unwitting dupes? In other words, they think the buildings fell down through natural causes and there were really explosives and they just couldn't figure that out. Do you think that's plausible?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in other words, you don't think they were in on it?
No, I don't.
I'm interested in what's going on. So I live in Westchester. So I went to the president of the AIA Westchester Mid-Hudson region, and she'd never heard of 9/11 Truth. She had no, Carol Chapa is her name. And I spoke to her. I just asked, what do you think of this new report, and what do you think about the report that Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth had put out? She was stunned by the evidence. She couldn't believe it. So she's actually now going to be talking to her board, hoping to meet up with more local architects and engineers. And I think it's good to ask questions. If people have questions on the official report, why wouldn't there be a new report?
I'm saying that every demolition expert is going to ask the same question. Why is there no physical evidence of demolition?
I don't want to be interviewed.
How do you promote a truth if you don't speak?
Both towers came down in 9 seconds at the speed of gravity as free fall and straight down into its own footprint. And then you have the molten iron. Molten iron. It's not molten steel. It's molten iron in the basement for over a month.
But that's exactly not a reason to suspect demolition. I mean, the iron is under the rubble pile. It's being insulated from the elements. It's retaining heat, and as a consequence, the temperature's increasing.
But how can it have so much more heat than jet fuel can provide? How can it have?
That has nothing to do with the jet fuel.
Thousands of degrees, 3,000 degrees. Jet fuel can't get that hot.
But there's no explosive that gets that hot.
You would have had just mass, and it would have. And what happened to the core columns? There's 47 steel core columns in the center of the building. Where do they go?
But are you aware that NIST released 10,000 pages on this subject? I mean, I don't prefer. I haven't read all of them. I've read the executive summaries and NIST NC Star 1 and 2.
NIST always said that there was factors that they couldn't explain. They never explained it.
They certainly
Thunder actually admitted there was no firefighting in building 7. So how could you pull firefighters?
We say something, you guys poo-poo it. You guys say something, we poo-poo it. So we get no. The truth is still the truth.
You're making an excellent point, and I keep arguing that the best way to do these things is to stage debates, open, free debates. I mean, personally, I have a little show with a small audience. I don't cut anybody's mic. I don't shout anybody down. If you see the show, you know I had Jim Fetzer on for 3 shows, and we let him talk and talk and talk. Yeah.
What TV station are you from?
Just a little cable show here in New York called Hardfire.
Didn't they tell the firemen in the buildings that the building's going to collapse? Giuliani got a phone call. The firemen aren't good enough to get a phone call to get out of there? That they knew that 1 and 2 were coming?
The fire battalion chief did know that World Trade Center 7 was going to come down as early as 2 in the afternoon.
Giuliani got a phone call saying 1 and 2 were coming down.
Actually, the firemen were saying, at least I saw them on...
Who told Giuliani that 1 and 2 were coming down?
Look, as far as I know, the fire department told them.
How come John D. Martini said that the planes or the buildings were designed to take multiple impacts of jetliner?
But he was right. The building was designed to take the impact of a plane. What they didn't reckon on was the effects of the fires, the loss of the fireproofing. The plane withstood the impact of a commercial airline.
This was well planned, long in advance. The U.S. was telling other nations that they were going to be invading Afghanistan by October.
For what purpose?
To take control of a pipeline that was going to be built from the Caspian Sea down to the Strait of Hormuz.
That's the Unocal pipeline. That was that's a Clinton-era project that was killed in 1998.
It wasn't killed. It wasn't killed. Condoleezza Rice and her business partner, a consultant, Hamid Karzai, set up that deal. They threatened the Taliban.
Unocal killed it in '98 because they
do not give us a carpet of gold.
No, that is a canard. The Unocal company decided they couldn't guarantee the safety of their workers.
Niaz Naik, he was the State Department representative that actually passed that threat on to Taliban representatives.
But there is no pipeline.
No, the U.S. military is on the point for point, the places where they were constructing the pipeline. That's the U.S. military's real job, to protect the pipeline.
But we're not building a pipeline.
There's no pipeline in Afghanistan.
We're not building a pipeline. No, there is no pipeline.
Listen,
the project was killed.
Strategic land for oil and energy dominance.
Well, how do we dominate oil if we're paying over $4 a gallon? Aren't we buying this oil at market prices?
Inflating the price by controlling scarcity.
BBC released the documents about artificial scarcity in the 80s.
Now, OPEC is turning off the spigot to squeeze us a little more. Now, how can this be good for us? I mean, in other words, if I say to you, you and I are going to go into a criminal enterprise together, you're going to love my plan, I'm all ears, and I say, tomorrow morning, here's what I'm going to do. I got a gun hidden in my apartment, and when no one's looking, I'm going to blow my foot off. And you say to me, what's the point? And I point? Do we need a point?
This is sheer fact. There is no money in peace. You cannot make any money in peace. The military-industrial complex can't make a dime if we live in a peaceful world.
I've seen your program several times, and what I've witnessed is a primary agenda of pigeonholing the 9/11 truth movement into controlled demolition, and that may simply by default be your guests on the show who want to discuss that issue. But
we just did a show with a no-planer.
Okay, well, I mean, you're still dealing with the physics of 9/11.
Let's talk. Theory has a Godzilla sitting on his head.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree. That's completely insane. But on the other hand, no, these people really believe their theory.
Perhaps, yeah, and they seem to get a lot of attention from the international media and our domestic media as well.
Well, look, it's so wacky it sells. I mean, people want to hear the craziest, silliest stories.
Aren't these folks that say controlled demolition duly as crazy in the eyes of the general public in the world?
Look, I am not qualified to draw up a hierarchy of craziness. My own view is that someone who speculates about controlled demolition is not as crazy as someone who says there were no planes when 100,000 people saw planes. I mean, controlled demolition is a theory I don't believe in, but it's not completely insane. If you say that, well, the buildings came down because flying reindeers butted them with their antlers, you're a little bit crazier than the no-planers, but not much.
Donald Rumsfeld admits $2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon.
Mr. Rumsfeld, where's this $1.3 trillion?
$2.3 trillion.
$1.3 trillion.
And there is no money missing. You have to understand that. The money is spent.
When in the history of human life has a plane evaporated? We lost a space shuttle going 18,000 miles an hour over half the country, and they were able to piece it back together partially. The commercial airline did not hit the Pentagon.
The passengers and crew were identified by DNA testing.
That's fine.
A conspiracy this vast would have unraveled very quickly.
Nonsense. It has. It has.
Name one whistleblower. Sibel Edmonds never says anything helpful to the truth movement.
What said is that they had definitive foreknowledge, dates, times, and targets. That's one.
She has never gone that far.
She certainly has.
Do you see the problem here? If we ignored warnings, then
what do you think warnings were? What do you think warnings were? Here's warnings were.
But then they were real attacks.
The intelligence communities of other nations saw what these nuts were doing and saying, listen, guys, chill. Okay, this event was not so much a shot at the American people to get us to do what they want. This was a shot by the neocons who seized power even from the power brokers to tell the other nations, we're playing a different game. We're playing a bigger game. Don't mess with us. We're really serious. That's what this was. This was a message to the world. The neocons got in accidentally because this was supposed to be... Those guys seized power from the people who assembled the Bush administration, and when they took over, they sent a loud message, don't mess with them. They're playing for real. And that's
but the outcome was obviously very bad for them. I mean, the neocons are all looking for jobs.
Yeah, they were also Machiavellis. Okay, these guys will do anything to achieve their goals. Anything.
What do you think their goals were?
Well, they've published them. Why don't you read them? There was never an investigation. The investigation, the mandate of the Keene Commission was to take the official story as told by the Bush administration and document it, and anything that didn't stick to that story, forget about. And the most notable testimony omitted from this official report was Rudolph Giuliani, not Sibel Edmonds, not the fireman. It's Giuliani himself isn't even in there. Okay.
And there was an initial investigation that included 7,000 agents from the FBI alone. They identified the hijackers, and then, various agencies, FEMA, NIST, they did the scientific work. So, the 9/11 Commission is a political operation. Republicans will complain that the 9/11 Commission was simply an opportunity for the Democrats on it to bash Bush. If you're a Democrat, you won't see it that way.
You you think that the American people in general, okay, and I've been dealing with this since 2003, saw every official news story that the people in this group saw, they would be standing on your side debating us? This isn't a matter of opinion. This is a matter of a group of people who looked at the evidence and a group of people who just took the word about what happened, that didn't go and look, that don't know about Building 7, that don't know about war games, that never heard PNAC. Let me tell you something. This country has enemies. Terrorists, we're under threat. Our democracy is under threat. Some people call them terrorists. Some people call them criminals. I call them the establishment media, okay? The media...
But the establishment media despises George Bush.
No, they don't. Here's how it works, my friend. Here's how it works, my friend. Here's how it works, my friend. This is exactly how media deception works. I worked for the Associated Press for 9 years, okay? Now what I do is I educate people of how media deception works. You have a reporter going out and doing his or her job and reporting some massive discovery of some information. I'll use a non-political news story. A few months ago, we're paying $4 a gallon for gasoline. Some good news reporters in this country reported about a Japanese car company that unveiled a car that runs on water, okay? A globally revolutionizing news story. It hits the news wire, it gets reported in some small town. Where's the deception lie? Did they lie? No. But somebody who controlled where that story goes and how much attention it gets. In the meantime, out of the 1,800 missing children a day in this country, someone makes a decision every once in a while to grab a distraction and report it everywhere.
I think we all get that point. But when you talk about a mainstream media that opposes every one of Bush's policies and has worked to undermine him every step of the way.
Here's what they do. You find a pedophile who's been screwing kids all day long, okay, for years. And you get a hero cop to go after him, and he writes him a parking ticket. And then they all talk about how the fact that the guy is writing him a parking ticket. Bush is war, Bush is nonsense. The guy stole an election. It's a coup d'etat. He should be arrested and hanged at this point.
Well, I disagree.
And the nonsense that they're talking about pales in comparison to the real crimes. And disagree, has nothing to disagree. 1,600 negative votes in one county in Florida is a stolen election.
Would you redefine me as someone asking for an investigation?
Sure.
At least to spend as much money as they spent on investigating Bill Clinton's blowjob?
Now, here's a question, though, when people ask about a new investigation. If you include real physicists, structural engineers, seismologists, metallurgists, avionics techs, forensic specialists, fire safety people, you're going to replicate the results of the original investigation.
How was that?
Well, I mean, there's real science and there's bogus science. Stephen Jones has been tweaking a contaminated dust sample for 4 years, and he's found absolutely nothing.
Okay, let me ask you a question. I work with metals, okay? I heat treat metals. I harden and temper metals. The official version has the Twin Towers coming down because the metal was heated enough to deform, correct? Well, let me tell you to weaken. Let me tell you a little secret. The molecular structure of steel doesn't start changing until all the steel of the whole building would be heated to near the temperature at which you say that steel would deform. For example,
the NIST report discusses this in great depth.
You want to know something? My forebearer started NIST in the 1850s, Edward Howard, America's top horologist. I know a little bit about NIST, and let me tell you something. Again, I will say, for the steel to deform enough, for you to say the trusses started to deform, the trusses would collapse, the floors would start to collapse, all the steel in the whole building would have to be heated to near that temperature because heat is whipped away along steel more than water.
Why do you say all the steel when you see clearly the inward bowing of external columns?
As soon as you... What inward bowing of external columns?
It's visible on all the videos. You see very clearly the inward bowing of the external columns. Now that eventually weakens
the... happened because they took the 47 internal columns down down? And that would cause the bowing. Remember,
no.
The center of the weight of the World Trade Center was being heard by the internal columns, where the elevators were. The 47 structural columns. The skin on the outside was just an adjunct to that. That was the construction of the building.
I don't mean this in an offensive way, but you haven't read the NIST report. You should read the executive summaries.
What is it? Was it a pancake collapse?
No, they rejected that.
Okay. Then how did it collapse?
They explained that the inward bowing of the external columns eventually caused the floor trusses to give way.
What about the internal columns? Where were the internal columns?
Well, on the impact floors, there were several of them.
I saw that being built. Do you know how big they were? You know how thick that steel
Yes.
was?
Yes.
And let me tell you something. Again, all the steel would have to be heated to near the temperature that.
I've discussed this with Thomas Eager, a metallurgist at MIT, Alan Pence, another metallurgist at Lehigh.
Okay,
I mean, they don't have a problem.
They've never hardened and tempered a screwdriver blade, and I have. And I'm telling you, I can't harden and temper I can't harden. I can't get a molecular change by the edge of the screwdriver unless the whole blade is heated to that heat.
What do you think happened to the Twin Towers?
Oh, God, I don't know. That's why I want an investigation. I really want an investigation. I don't know. I don't know.
All right.
I'm not going to advance. I really don't know.
Okay, but who would you like to conduct that second investigation?
Possibly an international tribunal.
But again, you'd need real scientists. I mean, in this country, we have theologians and talk radio hosts and Marxist literary theorists who all say Bush did it, but...
Well, I've heard real scientists say that. Why did it come down in free fall speeds?
But it didn't.
15 seconds?
Well, free fall would be 9.8.
Okay.
I mean,
so,
you know...
But this is 110 stories. You would imagine that the debris would create some resistance.
I'm not passing myself off as a physicist, but one quick answer. When someone says free fall speed, you point out that the debris is falling faster than the building, so it can't be free fall speed. You know, you just look at it. If the debris is falling faster, then it can't be free fall.
Where did the energy come from to pulverize the concrete? If you look
the kinetic energy when the top 30 floors collapse.
Wait a second. There's only potential energy in that building.
But once they start moving, it's kinetic.
Where did the kinetic energy come from to explode the building out?
It didn't.
Where did it come from? You have to get energy. If you calculate the energy of position of that building before it came down, and you calculated the damages that it did, and all the energy had to be added to that system.
Well, that was certainly contentious and loud, and we're done. That wraps it up for this edition of Hardfire. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week. I'm Ronald Wieck.
I'm sure I can if I have more time.
Hardfire is funded in part by the Libertarian Party of New York. www.ny.lp.org